The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by thinking beings. It floated in the empty space between 3 star systems, a monument to cooperation that had lasted for 12,000 years. 47 species sent their representatives here to talk, to argue, to make deals, and to keep the peace that held the galaxy together. Daniel Price sat in the outermost ring of seats. Where the newest members of the council were placed, humanity had only joined 63 years ago, which was nothing compared to species that had been members for thousands of years. The older races looked at humans the way adults look at children who have wandered into an important meeting. They were tolerated, sometimes smiled at, but never taken seriously. Daniel did not mind. He had learned that being underestimated was sometimes useful. The session that day began like any other. A trade dispute between 2 minor species. An argument about shipping routes. A long and boring debate about mining rights in an asteroid belt that nobody really cared about. Daniel listened to everything, taking notes on his datapad. Watching the body language of delegates from species he was still learning to understand. Then, High Chancellor Vorath of the Kelthari Dominion stood up, and everything changed. Vorath was an impressive being. He stood 3 meters tall, with forearms and skin that looked like polished stone. The Kelthari were one of the founding members of the council, and when their High Chancellor spoke, everyone listened. "I bring a matter of grave importance before this council," Vorath said. His natural language was a series of clicks and whistles, but the translation system turned it into smooth galactic standard. "I have evidence that the Sinith Collective has been building illegal weapons in the neutral zones." The chamber went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then it exploded into chaos. The Sinith were ancient and powerful. They had been part of the council since its founding. They held 3 permanent seats on the inner circle that made the most important decisions. Their bodies were made of living crystal that could change shape. And their lead delegate, a being called Crystal X9, immediately flashed bright red with anger. "This accusation is false and insulting," Crystal X9 said. "The Kelthari are trying to damage our reputation for their own political gain." "I have data files," Vorath replied calmly. "Sensor readings, communication, intercepts. The evidence is clear. Evidence that you probably created yourself," another delegate shouted. This was Representative Thal of the Vorlani Federation. "Everyone knows the Kelthari have wanted to weaken the Sinith for centuries. Vorlani have been the Sinith's loyal pets for just as long," someone else called. Out, Daniel watched as the argument spread like fire through dry grass. Species that had been allies for 1,000 years were suddenly screaming at each other. Old grudges that had been buried were dug up and thrown like weapons. Within an hour, the council had split into more than a dozen angry groups, each one blaming the others for problems real and imagined. Commander Lisa Grant sat next to Daniel. She was his military advisor, a former Navy officer with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She leaned close and spoke quietly. "This does not feel natural," she said. "Someone is pushing this." Daniel nodded. He had noticed the same thing. The way accusations were flying, the specific secrets being revealed, the perfect timing of each new piece of damaging information. It was too neat, too organized. He looked down at his datapad and began tracing the origins of the evidence Vorath had presented. The data files had come from an anonymous source, delivered to the Kelthari delegation 3 days ago. Daniel searched through public records and found that similar anonymous packages had been delivered to other delegations over the past month. Each one contained secrets about a different species. Each one was designed to create maximum damage. "Someone has been planning this for a long time," Daniel said to Lisa. "They have been feeding poison to everyone, waiting for the right moment to let it all explode." "Who would benefit from destroying the council?" Lisa asked. That was the question Daniel could not answer. Every species in the galaxy benefited from the council's existence. Even species that hated each other still needed the council to manage trade, prevent wars, and solve disputes. Destroying it would hurt everyone, unless someone wanted everyone to be hurt. The session was suspended as delegates, treated to their own sections of the station. Armed guards appeared in the corridors. Ships that had been docked peacefully now powered up their weapons, and raised their shields. Daniel gathered his small team in the human delegation's quarters. Besides Lisa, there was Kevin Morris, a young communications expert who could find patterns in data that others missed. There was Amy Torres, a cultural analyst who had spent years studying alien societies. And there was Dr. Samuel Wright, an elderly scientist who had been part of the first human delegation to the council. "We need to find the source of these leaks," Daniel said. "Someone is playing all of us against each other, and if we do not figure out who, this council is going to tear itself apart." "The major powers will blame each other," Dr. Wright said. "That is what they always do. They will not look for an outside enemy because they cannot imagine one exists." "Then we will look," Daniel said. "Humanity is too small to be suspected of anything. We can investigate without drawing attention." Kevin was already working on his computer. "I am tracking the data packets that were sent to the different delegations. They are bouncing through dozens of relay stations to hide their origin, but there might be a pattern." "Find it," Daniel said. "Amy, I need you to reach out to the neutral species, the ones who have no stake in these conflicts. See if any of them have noticed anything strange." "The Velmari might help," Amy said. "They are pacifists. They have stayed out of every argument so far." Daniel nodded. "Good, talk to them. Dr. Wright, I need everything you know about the history of this council. Every conflict, every crisis, every time something like this happened before." "Nothing like this has ever happened before," Dr. Wright said quietly. "That is what worries me." Outside the viewport, Daniel could see the lights of warships moving into position. Species that had been friends yesterday were now treating each other as enemies. The 12,000 years of peace that the council represented was falling apart in hours. But Daniel had noticed something that gave him hope. Every delegation was so focused on blaming each other that none of them were asking the obvious question. Who sent the original messages? Who gathered all these secrets? Who knew exactly which buttons to push? Someone out there had spent years studying the council, learning its weaknesses, preparing for this moment. Someone very patient, someone very smart, and Daniel Price intended to find them. 3 days passed, and the situation grew worse with every hour. The Galactic Council had stopped meeting entirely. Delegations refused to leave their own sections of Station Paramount. Armed guards patrolled every corridor. Ships circled the station like sharks waiting for blood. Daniel Price had not slept more than a few hours since the crisis began. His eyes were red and tired, but his mind was sharp. He stood in front of a holographic display that filled half the room, staring at lines and numbers that most people would find meaningless. Kevin Morris had done incredible work. The young communications expert had traced hundreds of data transmissions, following them through relay stations across the galaxy. Most of the trails led nowhere, deliberately designed to confuse anyone who tried to follow them. But Kevin had found something strange. "Look at this," Kevin said, pointing to a cluster of lines that all met at a single point. Every single leak, every piece of evidence that was sent to the delegations, it all passes through this location. Daniel studied the point Kevin was indicating. "That is inside Station Paramount." "Yes, maintenance level 7. It is supposed to be empty. Just automated systems for life support and power distribution." "Supposed to be," Lisa Grant said. She had her hand on her sidearm, ready for trouble. "Someone put something there that should not be there. We need to see it for ourselves," Daniel said. "That could be dangerous," Dr. Samuel Wright warned. "If whoever is behind this realizes we are close to finding them, they might do something desperate." "They are already doing desperate things," Daniel replied. "Half the species in this council are ready to go to war. If we do not find answers soon, there might not be a council left to save." Amy Torres entered the room, and she was not alone. Behind her walked a tall, thin being with skin like pale blue silk and eyes that shone like pools of liquid silver. Daniel recognized the species immediately. This was a Velmari, one of the oldest and most peaceful races in the galaxy. "This is Delegate Saren," Amy said. "The Velmari have been watching this crisis carefully. They have some information that might help us." Saren moved with a grace that made it seem like floating rather than walking. When the Velmari spoke, the voice was soft and musical. like wind through crystal chimes. "We have observed patterns in this conflict that disturb us deeply," Saren said. "The way old wounds are being reopened. The way trust is being destroyed. This is not natural disagreement. This is careful destruction. You know who is responsible?" Daniel asked. Saren's silver eyes met his. "We have theories that my people have held for many centuries. But the truth, if we are correct, will be difficult for this council to accept. Tell us anyway." Saren was silent for a moment, as if deciding whether to share a great secret. Then the Velmari spoke. "Long before the council existed, long before any of our species had traveled between stars, there was another civilization. We call them the Precursors. They built the first relay networks that allow ships to travel faster than light. They seeded life on thousands of worlds. They created the conditions that allowed all of us to exist." "I have heard of the Precursors," Dr. Wright said. "They are considered a myth by most scientists, a legend to explain things we do not understand." "Myths often contain truth," Saren replied. "The Velmari have studied the Precursors for thousands of years. We believe they did not disappear. We believe they are still watching, still waiting, still occasionally reaching out to shape the galaxy according to their will." "You think the Precursors are behind this crisis?" Lisa asked. Her voice was skeptical, but she was listening. "We think it is possible. The level of knowledge required to manipulate this council, the patience to gather secrets over many years, the technology to remain hidden. These are not things any current species possesses." Daniel looked at the holographic display at the mysterious point on maintenance level 7. "Then let us find out for certain." The group made their way through the station carefully. The corridors were empty at this level, designed for machines rather than living beings. The air was cold and carried the smell of metal and recycled atmosphere. Their footsteps echoed in the darkness. Kevin led the way, following the signal to its source. They passed rows of humming generators and banks of computer systems that kept the massive station running. Finally, they reached a section that should have been empty. It was not empty, hidden behind a false wall was a room filled with equipment that made no sense. Components from a dozen different species were combined in ways that should have been impossible. Crystalline structures from the Sinith homeworld were wired into Kelthari processing units. Velmari energy collectors powered devices that looked like nothing any of them had ever seen. But it was what stood in the center of the room that made Daniel's heart stop. A stasis pod. And inside the pod, floating in pale blue liquid, was a human being. "That is impossible," Lisa whispered. "We know every human on this station. We account for everyone." Kevin was already scanning the pod with his equipment. His face went pale as he read the results. "This pod has been here for at least 40 years. Before first contact. Before humanity knew anything about the Council or the other species." Daniel stepped closer to the pod. The figure inside was a man, middle-aged, with brown hair and ordinary features. He looked like he could be anyone. A teacher. A pilot. A neighbor. "Someone put him here," Daniel said slowly. "Someone brought a human to this station decades before we even knew aliens existed. They have been using him ever since." "Using him for what?" Amy asked. Tevin studied his readings more carefully. "His brain activity is minimal, but it is not zero. There are patterns, signals." Looked up, his young face showing a mix of horror and understanding. "They're using his brain as a transmitter. His neural patterns are carrying the data that is tearing the Council apart. He is not conscious, but his mind is being used as an antenna." Saran made a sound like a sigh. "The Precursors. They chose humanity specifically. A young species, newly arrived to the galactic stage. No one would suspect you. And if discovered, your people would be blamed for everything." Daniel stared at the man in the pod. A human being kidnapped and violated, turned into a tool for alien manipulation. He felt anger building inside him, cold and hard like iron. "You need to take this to the Council," he said. "Everyone needs to see this." "They will not believe you," Siren said. "The other species are too busy blaming each other. They will say this is a human trick to escape responsibility." Daniel turned to face the Velmari. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with determination.
Oh.
Then we will have to make them believe. One way or another, Daniel Price stood in the hidden room for a long time, staring at the man floating in the stasis pod. The soft blue light from the liquid made the man's face look peaceful, like someone having a pleasant dream. But Daniel knew the truth was far darker. This man had been stolen from his life, brought to a place that should not exist, and used as a weapon against species he had never even known about. "Can we wake him?" Daniel asked. Dr. Samuel Wright studied the pod's controls carefully. "The technology is beyond anything I have seen before, but the basic biology is still human. I think we could revive him, yes. The question is whether we should. Why would we not? Because right now, he is evidence," the old scientist explained. "If we wake him up, the other species might claim we coached him. They might say, we created this entire situation to make ourselves look innocent. A sleeping man in a pod is harder to dismiss than a talking one." Daniel understood the logic, but it felt wrong to leave someone trapped like this. Still, there were bigger things at stake than one man's comfort. "We leave him for now," Daniel said, "but we are coming back for him. I promise." Kevin Morris had been recording everything. Video of the room, scans of the equipment, readings from the stasis pod. He transferred copies to several secure locations, making sure the evidence could not be destroyed or hidden. "The signal array is still active," Kevin reported. "It is still sending data, still trying to create more conflict. Should we shut it down?" "Not yet," Daniel said. "If we shut it down, whoever is controlling it will know we found this place. We need to be smart about our next move." They sealed the hidden room and made their way back to the human delegation's quarters. The corridors were still empty and cold, but now Daniel saw them differently. This station, that seemed so permanent, so powerful, was just another tool being used by forces that had existed longer than any of them could imagine. Lisa Grant walked beside him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking about time," Daniel said. "The precursors have been planning this for at least 40 years, maybe longer. They are patient in ways we cannot understand. They think in centuries, while we think in years." "Does that scare you?" Daniel considered the question. "No, it makes me angry. They have been playing games with our lives, with the lives of everyone in this galaxy, and they thought they could do it without anyone noticing. They almost did," Lisa pointed out. "Almost is not good enough. Not for them, and not for us." When they reached the human quarters, Daniel gathered his team and began planning. They needed to present their evidence to the Council in a way that could not be dismissed or ignored. The other species were so busy fighting each other that they would look for any reason to reject information that did not support their existing beliefs. "We need allies," Daniel said. "Species who have no reason to lie for us, and no reason to protect the real enemy."
Oh.
Delegate Saren had remained with them. "The Velmari will support you. We have waited a long time for someone to find this truth. One voice will not be enough. The Velmari are respected, but you are also known for being passive. The aggressive species will say, you are too gentle to understand what is really happening." Amy Torres spoke up. "What about the smaller species? The ones who never get involved in the big arguments?" "What do you mean?" "There are dozens of minor species in the Council. They do not have powerful fleets or ancient histories. They just want to trade and live in peace. This crisis threatens them more than anyone because they cannot defend themselves if war breaks out." Daniel saw the wisdom in this approach. The small species have nothing to gain from supporting humanity if we are lying. They have everything to lose if they back the wrong side. That makes them credible witnesses. He turned to Amy. "I need you to reach out to as many minor delegations as you can. Tell them what we found. Invite them to see the evidence for themselves. Let them draw their own conclusions." Over the next 2 days, Amy Torres became the busiest person on Station Paramount. She visited delegation after delegation, speaking to representatives from species that most people forgot existed. The tremoli, small furry beings who specialized in mineral trading, the Oseth, aquatic creatures who lived in special water-filled chambers, the Vindari, tall insect-like beings who rarely spoke but watched everything with their compound eyes. At first, many of them were suspicious. Why would humans reach out to them? What did the newest species in the council want with the smallest? But Amy was patient and honest. She did not try to convince anyone of anything. She simply shared the evidence and asked them to look with their own eyes. One by one, representatives from minor species made their way to maintenance level 7. They saw the hidden room. They saw the stasis pod. They saw the human man floating in blue liquid, his brain being used to destroy the peace they all depended on, and one by one, they agreed to stand with humanity when the truth was revealed. Meanwhile, Daniel worked on a different problem. How could he get the major powers to listen? The Kelthari, the Sinith, the Vorlani. The others were so caught up in their accusations that they had stopped thinking clearly. They needed to be shocked out of their anger and forced to see what was really happening. "Call an emergency session," he told Lisa. "Use whatever authority we have as council members. Major powers will refuse to attend," Lisa said. "They are still demanding apologies from each other. They will not refuse if they think there is something to gain. Tell them humanity has information about who really started this crisis. Tell them we are ready to name the guilty party." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "That is a dangerous game. Everyone will come expecting us to blame someone else. When we do not, they might turn on us." "They might," Daniel agreed. "But I am counting on curiosity being stronger than anger. Everyone wants to know the truth, even if they are not ready to accept it." The message went out to all 47 delegations. An emergency session called by the human representatives, promising to reveal the true source of the crisis. The response was immediate and intense. Some delegations sent angry replies, accusing humanity of trying to manipulate the situation. Others sent cautious inquiries, asking what kind of evidence the humans possessed. And a few, the minor species that Amy had already contacted, sent messages of quiet support. Daniel read every response carefully. He was looking for something specific, and finally he found it. The Kelthari High Chancellor himself had agreed to attend. So had the Sinith Crystal Council. So had the leaders of every major faction that had been at each other's throats for the past week. Curiosity had won. Now Daniel just had to deliver something worth being curious about. The night before the emergency session, Daniel sat alone in his quarters, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, something ancient and powerful was watching. The precursors, or whatever they really were, had been playing this game for longer than human civilization had existed. They had technology that made the most advanced species in the council look primitive. But they had made a mistake. They had assumed that when things went wrong, everyone would blame each other. They had assumed that no one would ask the right questions. They had underestimated humans. Daniel smiled in the darkness. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who knew he was about to pick a fight with something far more powerful than himself, and he intended to win. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so full or so tense. Every species had sent their representatives, but they had also sent their guards. Armed soldiers from 47 different worlds lined the walls, watching each other with suspicious eyes. Warships floated outside the station, weapons ready, waiting for a signal that might never come or might come any second. Daniel Price walked to the center of the chamber alone. He wore the simple gray uniform of the human diplomatic corps, with no weapons and no protection. He looked small and fragile, surrounded by beings who were larger, older, and more powerful than any human who had ever lived. High Chancellor Voreth of the Kelthari spoke first. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "You called this session human. You claim to have information about who is responsible for this crisis. Speak now, or be condemned for wasting the council's time." Daniel looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as he could. The anger in the room was like heat from a fire. Everyone wanted someone to blame. Everyone wanted this nightmare to end. "Honored delegates," Daniel began, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I am about to tell you something that will be difficult to believe. I ask only that you listen until I am finished, and then verify what I say for yourselves." "Get on with it," someone shouted from the upper tiers. Daniel nodded. 1 week ago, this council began to tear itself apart. Secrets were revealed. Accusations were made. Old friends became new enemies. Everyone blamed everyone else, and no one asked the most important question. He paused, letting the silence build. Where did the secrets come from? Who gathered information about every species in this council? Who knew exactly which wounds to reopen and which buttons to push? Krista Lexanine, the Synth delegate, pulsed with impatient colors. Obviously, it was the Kelthari. They brought the first accusation. The evidence was delivered to us, Vorith replied angrily. We did not create it, exactly, Daniel said. The evidence was delivered to you. Just as evidence was delivered to the Synth, to the Vorlani, to the Dranathi, to every major power in this chamber. Anonymous packages arriving at perfect times containing secrets that should have been impossible to obtain. The chamber grew quieter. Some delegates were beginning to understand where this was going. I asked my team to trace the source of these deliveries. It was not easy. The trail was hidden behind dozens of relay stations and false routes. But eventually we found where all the signals originated. Daniel gestured, and Kevin Morris activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. It showed a map of Station Paramount, with a blinking red dot on Maintenance Level 7. Right here. Inside this station, inside a room that officially does not exist. Vorith leaned forward. What did you find in this room? Technology that does not belong to any species in this council. Equipment built from components that should not be able to work together. And something else. Daniel paused again. A stasis pod containing a human being. The chamber exploded with noise. Accusations, demands for explanation, cries of confusion. Daniel waited for the chaos to die down before continuing. The man in the pod was taken from Earth more than 40 years ago, before humanity knew that aliens existed. Before we had any contact with the galaxy, his brain has been modified and is being used as a biological transmitter, broadcasting the signals that have been tearing this council apart. This is absurd, a Vorlani delegate shouted. You expect us to believe that someone kidnapped a human decades ago and has been using him to destroy the council? Who would do such a thing? Delegate Cerrone of the Velmarie rose to speak. The tall, graceful being commanded immediate attention. The precursors, Saren said simply. The word sent a ripple through the chamber. Some delegates looked confused. Others looked frightened. A few, the oldest species, looked like they had just been reminded of a nightmare they had tried to forget. The precursors are a myth, someone said. Stories to explain ancient ruins. The precursors are real, Saren replied. My people have studied their artifacts for thousands of years. They did not disappear. They are still watching us, still judging us, and apparently still manipulating us when they decide we have grown too powerful. Daniel spoke again. I understand that this is hard to accept. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to look at the evidence yourselves. Send your own teams to Maintenance Level 7. Examine the technology. Trace the signals. Wake the man in the pod and ask him what happened to him. Why should we trust anything you show us? Krista Lexanine demanded. This could all be a human trick to escape blame. If it was a human trick, why would we use a human victim? Daniel replied. Why would we create evidence that makes our own species look like a target? We gain nothing from this, except the truth. A small delegate in the upper tiers stood up. It was the representative from the Tremoli, a species so minor that most of the major powers did not even know their name. The small furry being spoke in a voice that was barely loud enough to be heard. I've seen the evidence the human speaks of. I went to Maintenance Level 7 myself. What he says is true. Another delegate stood. Then another. Representatives from a dozen minor species rose to confirm what Daniel had said. They had all visited the hidden room. They had all seen the stasis pod. They had all examined the strange technology that matched no known civilization. The chamber grew quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of anger, but the silence of beings who were beginning to realize they had been fooled. Vorath spoke slowly. If what you say is true, if there really is an ancient species manipulating us, then we have been fighting each other for no reason. Worse than no reason, Daniel said. We have been fighting because someone wanted us to. Someone who benefits when we destroy each other. Someone who sees our cooperation as a threat. Why would anyone see us as a threat? A delegate asked. We are just trying to trade and live in peace, Saren answered. Because together, we are strong. 47 species working together can accomplish things that no single civilization could achieve alone. The precursors dominated this galaxy when they were the only intelligent life. They may not want to share. Daniel stepped forward, his voice growing stronger. I do not know exactly what the precursors want. I do not know how long they have been watching us or what they plan to do next. But I know this. They expected us to tear each other apart. They expected us to be so busy fighting that we would never look for the real enemy. Looked around the chamber one more time. They were wrong. And now we have a choice. We can go back to blaming each other, which is exactly what they want. Or we can work together to find out who has been pulling our strings and make sure they can never do it again. The silence stretched on for a long moment. Then High Chancellor Vorath did something that surprised everyone. He stepped down from his elevated seat and walked to the center of the chamber where Daniel stood. The Kelthari towered over the human, 4 arms folded across his stone-like chest. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I owe you an apology, Ambassador Price. I accused the Syneth, based on evidence. That was given to me by enemies I did not know I had. I nearly started a war because I was too proud to ask questions. Oreth turned to face Crystal X9. I withdraw my accusations against the Syneth Collective. I ask for your forgiveness. The Syneth delegate pulsed with colors that Daniel had never seen before. When Crystal X9 spoke, the translation system rendered the words as something close to wonder. You have it? And I offer the same apology for the things I said in anger? One by one, other delegates stepped forward. Accusations were withdrawn. Apologies were offered. The alliances that had shattered over the past week began to slowly reform. Daniel watched it happen with a mixture of relief and caution. This was only the first step. The real enemy was still out there, watching from the darkness between stars. But for the first time since the crisis began, he allowed himself to hope. 1 week after Daniel Price addressed the Galactic Council, Station Paramount had transformed. The warships that had circled like predators were now working together, their crews sharing information and resources. Armed guards still patrolled the corridors, but now they wore mixed uniforms from different species, a symbol of the new cooperation that was spreading through the station. A joint investigation team had spent days examining Maintenance Level 7. Scientists from 20 different species studied the alien technology, each one bringing unique knowledge and perspective. They confirmed everything that Daniel and his team had found. The equipment was real, the signals were real, and the technology was older than any civilization currently in the Council. The man in the stasis pod was carefully revived. His name was Gregory Palmer, and he had been a cargo pilot on Earth 43 years ago. He remembered leaving on a routine flight, seeing a strange light in the sky, and then waking up surrounded by creatures from his deepest nightmares. Except they were not nightmares. They were his rescuers. Gregory spent hours talking with doctors and investigators. He could not explain what had happened to him during the decades he was unconscious. He had no memory of being used as a transmitter, no awareness of the damage that had been done through his stolen mind. When he learned the truth, he wept. Daniel visited him in the medical bay. The two humans sat together in silence for a long time, looking out at the stars through a small viewport. I have a daughter, Gregory said finally. She was 7 years old when I disappeared. She would be 50 now. If she is still alive, we'll find out, Daniel promised. We will get you home. Home. Gregory laughed bitterly. I do not even know what that word means anymore. The world I left does not exist. Everyone I knew is either dead or old. I am a stranger in my own time. Daniel did not have any words that could make that better, so he just sat with Gregory and let the silence speak for both of them. The Galactic Council held a formal session to decide what to do next. For the first time in memory, all 47 species voted together on a single resolution. They would form a new organization dedicated to studying the precursors and defending against future manipulation. Every species would contribute resources, scientists, and ships. The organization would answer to the full council, not to any single power. High Chancellor Voreth presented the resolution himself. We have been reminded that we are stronger together than apart. Whatever challenges we face, whatever enemies we discover, we will face them as one. The vote was unanimous. Even species that had been at each other's throats just weeks ago raised their voices together in agreement. After the session, Voreth sought out Daniel privately. The massive Kelthari had to bend down to speak with the human at eye level. Your species has been part of this council for only 63 years, Voreth said. In that time, you have shown qualities that put older species to shame. Curiosity, persistence, the ability to see what others miss. We are just stubborn, Daniel replied with a small smile. When something does not make sense, we keep asking questions until it does. That is a valuable trait. The older species have forgotten how to question. We assume we know everything because we have been around so long. You reminded us that wisdom is not the same as age. Daniel accepted the compliment with a nod. What happens now? The precursors are still out there. They know we found their operation. They will try something else. Let them try, Voreth said. They have been working in shadows for millions of years because they feared what we might do if we were united. Now we are united. Now we are watching. The advantage they had is gone. Outside the station, ships from different species worked side by side to dismantle the hidden signal array. The technology would be studied, reverse-engineered, and eventually understood. Every secret the precursors had used against the Council would become a weapon to use against them. Lisa Grant found Daniel on the observation deck, watching the work. She stood beside him in comfortable silence for a while, before speaking. The Synth have offered to share their archives on precursor artifacts. The Velmar are opening their research facilities to the joint investigation. Everyone wants to work with us suddenly. Fear does that, Daniel said. When people realize they have a common enemy, old grudges become less important. Do you think it will last? Once the immediate crisis is over, will they go back to fighting each other? Daniel considered the question. Maybe. Old habits are hard to break. But something changed in that council chamber. They saw how easily they were manipulated. They saw how close they came to destroying everything they had built. That kind of lesson does not fade quickly, turned to face Lisa. Besides, we are going to make sure they do not forget. Humanity has a new role in this council. We are the ones who ask uncomfortable questions. We are the ones who look for patterns that others miss. We are the ones who refuse to accept easy answers. Lisa smiled. That sounds exhausting. Probably. But it is better than sitting in the back row being ignored. A message arrived for Daniel from the medical bay. Gregory Palmer was asking to see him again. Daniel made his way through the station, passing groups of mixed-species workers and officials who nodded respectfully as he walked by. The human delegation had gone from being an afterthought to being the center of attention. Gregory was sitting up in bed when Daniel arrived. The older man looked better than he had the day before. Some color had returned to his face, and his eyes were clearer. I have been thinking, Gregory said, about what was done to me, about how they used my mind without my knowledge or consent. That was not your fault, Daniel said. You were a victim, I know, but I was also a weapon. My brain broadcast signals that nearly destroyed 1,000 years of peace. People could have died because of what was done through me. Daniel sat down beside the bed. What are you trying to say? Gregory met his eyes. I want to help. I want to be part of whatever comes next. I have spent 40 years being used by the enemy. Now I want to be used by my own side. That is not necessary. You have suffered enough. It is necessary for me. Gregory's voice was firm. I need to do something positive with whatever time I have left. I need to balance the scales somehow. Daniel understood. He had seen the same determination in soldiers who had survived terrible things and wanted to make sure their suffering had meaning. The joint investigation could use people with unique perspectives, Daniel said. Your experience with precursor technology, even if you do not remember it consciously, might provide insights that others miss. Then sign me up. Daniel shook Gregory's hand. Two humans, separated by decades of stolen time, connected by a shared enemy and a shared purpose. That evening, Daniel stood alone on the observation deck one final time. The stars stretched out in every direction, ancient and cold, and full of mysteries. Somewhere out there, the precursors were watching. They had seen their plan fail. They had seen the species they hoped to destroy come together, instead of falling apart. Daniel did not know what they would do next. He did not know if humanity would be ready when they made their next move. But he knew one thing for certain. When the precursors looked at the Galactic Council now, they did not see 47 squabbling species waiting to be manipulated. They saw a united front. They saw civilizations that had learned to ask questions instead of accepting easy answers. They saw a galaxy that was finally paying attention, and at the center of it all, they saw humanity. The young species. The curious species. The species that refused to stop asking why. The precursors had wanted to use humans as a weapon against the galaxy. Instead, they had shown the galaxy exactly what humans were capable of. Daniel smiled into the darkness. It was not a smile of victory. The real fight was just beginning. But it was a smile of confidence. Whatever came next, humanity would face it the same way they had faced everything else. With questions, with determination, with the stubborn refusal to give up that had carried them from caves to stars, and somewhere in the void between galaxies, something very old and very powerful felt something it had not experienced in millions of years. Doubt the humans had surprised them once. They might surprise them again, and that possibility, more than anything else, changed everything.